welcome back to our beginner series in programming in C#. In the previous lesson, we looked at the while loop. I remember we said there were three different ways we create loops in C#. The first being the while loop, the second the for loop, and then the for each loop. So in this lesson, we're going to look at the for loop. Let's go ahead and open our application, our program in Visual Studio. So this was the last program we wrote. We'll just go ahead and let's reduce that in case we run it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and comment out this code that we wrote in the previous lesson. Today we're going to look at the for loop. So how do we create a for loop? Let me open up Notepad just to give a brief introduction to how the for loop is written. So for the for loop, remember for the while loop, you write the while keyword. For the for loop, obviously you start with the for keyword, and then you open your normal bracket, close the normal bracket. Inside the open and close normal brackets, you put okay, not yet the Boolean expression. You start with statements actually. So you can have statement 1, comma, statement 2, comma, dot dot dot. Now this, remember this dot 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 mean you can add as many statements as you like. Now notice this, we are putting a comma, not a semicolon. If you remember in our program, in programming in C#, you always end statements with semicolons. However, in the for loop, at the beginning, you cannot you do not use a semicolon to mark the end of your initialization statements. Now these statements here are actually called the initialization statements. We'll see why they are called initialization statements in a while. Now you separate these statements with commas, and like I said before, you can have as many initialization statements as you like. However, from practice, you will realize that you wouldn't need more than 3 or 2. In most cases, only 1 initialization statements are used. Now, when you're done writing your initialization statements, you add a semicolon. Okay, so you add a semicolon. So I'm putting the semicolon there. Then this semicolon marks the end of your initialization statements. Okay, then it now expects you to enter your condition. Now the condition is written as a Boolean expression, just like the condition we used in just like the condition we use in the while loop. So you put your condition, which is a Boolean expression, and then end it with a semicolon, and then finally you add your what do we call them, the should we call them the predicate statement? No, not the predicate statements. They are actually called let's just call them the after statements. What that means is they are actually executed at the end of your loop. I'll explain. I'll show you how they work. So you can have statement 1, statement sorry, not a semicolon. They are separated by commas, not semicolons. Okay, so you can have statement 1, statement 2, and a comma, and then dot dot dot. Okay, let's just extend this to keep it on the same line. Okay, so this is how you arrange the items inside your normal brackets in a for loop. Okay, and then you open up your curly bracket and then close your curly bracket, and inside the curly bracket, just like the while loop, you can have your statement 1, I know it's beginning to get complicated, but I'll explain. You see that it's very, very similar to the while loop. Apart from some of these, if you eliminate these and these, you realize that it's actually exactly like a while loop. However, because of these two, that's the initialization statements and the after statements, it looks as if it's complicated, but I'll explain what those do. So you will have your statement 2, semicolon, and then we'll just add 3 dots to indicate that you can have as many statements as you like here. So you can have statement 3, statement 4, statement 5. You can have as much as you like. So that is basically the for loop, how the for loop is written. Now, if you remember in our explanation in the while loop, this is your condition, okay, in the while loop. Let's assume this weren't there, that's the initialization statements are not there and the after statements are not there, leaving us with only the Boolean expression. It makes this look like the while loop. Now what you should know is that you can actually have a very similar an exact for loop that looks like a while loop, because the thing with these initialization statements is that they are actually optional. They are not necessary that you provide them. So in fact, let's use a square bracket here around the initialization statements. What the square brackets are just indicating is they're just saying what you provide inside here are optional. So you can actually ignore that. However, remember this semicolon is necessary. Even if you don't provide anything here, you have to mark the semicolon. Okay, you have to place the semicolon, add your Boolean expression, add another semicolon, and then these after statements are also optional. So we're going to add a square bracket to indicate that they are optional. So anyway, let me add another for loop down here just to show what I'm trying to explain. What I mean is you can actually have a for loop like this: a semicolon, Boolean expression here, and then another semicolon. Okay, this is a valid for loop. Okay, what that means is, okay, so we can have our statement 1 here, semicolon, statement 2, semicolon, and we'll just add a dot dot dot. Now, do you agree with me that this looks exactly like our while loop? And in fact, not just looking exactly, it achieves exactly the same thing as the while loop we treated in the previous lesson, because it will behave exactly like it, because everything here is just like the while loop. So if the compiler encounters this for loop, it just checks this Boolean expression. If it is true, it goes ahead and executes this block or these statements, and then comes back to check this Boolean expression again for the second time. If it is still true, it goes ahead and executes just like the while loop, and when this evaluates to false, it exits the for loop by skipping the statements and then exiting. Okay, so this for loop is exactly like a while loop. However, if you remember, the only difference is that in the while loop you don't need these semicolon, that's the before the Boolean expression and after the Boolean expression. Now for the for loop, they are actually mandatory to add these semicolons. The reason is because the for loop expects initialization statements here, which are optional, by the way. So by not adding initialization statements, you still have to put the semicolon. Okay, and then the after statements, the for loop also expects the after statements, even though they are not mandatory. So it still expects you to add a semicolon here, even if you're not going to add the after statements. Now let's look at what do these initialization statements and after statements do. Let's should we go to Visual Studio, or okay, let me just give a brief explanation before we head to our Visual Studio. The initialization statements, what they do, remember, these are actual statements. They are actually program statements. They're actually code, lines of code. Okay, that's a valid statement that you write here. Okay, the only thing is you don't add a semicolon after each statement. Okay, after each command. They're like commands, just like normal command, just like the commands you provide here. However, you don't end them with semicolons. You separate them with commas. Okay, then what they are used for, the way they are executed is that when this for loop comes for the first time, that's the first time the program is encountering this for loop. Remember, it's a loop, so even after encountering this, it goes round and then comes back to re-execute everything again. So when it is executing it for the first time, that's the first implementation or the first execution of the for loop. That is when these initialization statements are executed. Okay, so after these initialization statements are executed, the boolean expression is now checked. If it is true, then remember, these are the after statements, so they are not even examined by the compiler at this point. It only looks at the boolean expression. If it is true, it executes this, okay, the code inside here, and then after executing these, it takes whatever you provide here, that's the after statements, and it appends them down here. Imagine if you have written these, that's this statement 1, statement 2, and dot dot dot, you add them here. Okay, I see this going to we're going to have confusion because I also named this statement 1 statement. So let's call this after statement 1, after statement 2. Okay, let's use a capital S here. So after statement 1, after statement 2, and dot dot dot. So what that means is it appends whatever you provide here after statement 1. Okay, after statement 2. Okay, and then after statement 3. Okay, all right, what I'm trying to explain is oh sorry, not after statement, we'll just add a dot dot dot, meaning whatever is here is going to be appended here. Now remember, this, you're not the one that writes this. In fact, let's enclose them in square brackets just to show you that you're not the one that writes this code. Okay, it is the compiler that takes whatever you've written here, okay, it appends it down here. Now what happens in such a case, it means that whenever these statements are executed, immediately they are finished, the execution of these statements is done. These statements, that's why they're called after statements. Okay, they're called the after statement because they are executed after these have been executed. Okay, so basically what that means is everything here, whatever you have in the block plus what you provide here, are going to be executed. Now one may ask, why then do you even need them there? Why not just take whatever is there and then just add them here in your code and then ignore that? Well, that's a good question anyway, but as you realize, these are just most of the time you use this for like implementing, like they do not, whatever code, the code you provide here are code that do not actually affect the how do I put it, they do not affect the actual implementation you're trying to achieve inside here. Okay, they are usually used to like control your looping. Okay, the code you provide here are usually used to control your looping, in the sense that imagine if you wanted to loop this 10 times. Okay, like you have a statement like in, okay, let's take for example the while statement we wrote in the, there it is, in this statement. Look at the what this x plus plus is doing. If you look at it, this x plus plus is not actually doing anything in we're not trying to use it to achieve anything here in our program. Like, this statement was written by a loop. We're not using it to display the statement. We're not using, all we're doing is we're using it to control this while loop, so that by the time this x reaches 100, how does x reach 100? Is by this, because this is controlling it. This incrementation of x is controlling, is like controlling the value of x and causing it to reach that 100, which when it reaches 100 the whole loop stops. So this statement is just inside here in order to achieve some form of control, okay, on our loop. Imagine if this x plus plus is not written inside here. What happens? It means x is going to be 1 throughout our program, which means this loop is going to keep repeating itself and it will never end. Okay, it's going to be an endless loop because 1 is always less than 100. And by the time you execute this, it goes back, check again, 1 is less than 100. Yes, that's how it keeps going round, and it doesn't end. Okay, so if you look at it, this statement is just for controlling the number of times we go round this loop. Okay, that is why in the for loop, the for loop decides to give you a space where you can just remove this, something like this, that's the after statement, and just add it, append it inside your inside the normal brackets for the for loop. Let's just, I think that's so much explanation for just introduction of the for loop. I hope people don't get confused. Let's go back to Notepad and I'll just show you oh sorry, I've closed it out. Anyway, no problem. Let's go ahead and create a for loop just to show. In fact, we're going to create an exact a for loop that does exactly what this while loop is doing. Do you see this int x equals 1, this declaration statement? This declaration statement, if you notice, we wrote it outside the while. So this actually gets executed once, right? It gets executed once. Now, for the for loop, if we're going to create a for loop, we don't even need to create this declaration, because inside the for loop, remember the initialization statements, that gives us a space where we can create this declaration. Okay, so we can write something like for and then take this statement and use it as our initialization statement. Int x equals 1. Okay, that's our initialization statement. Now imagine if we had other initialization statements. We can actually separate them by commas. Okay, I can use a comma here and then write my second initialization statement, like int y equals say 10, for example. Okay, this is correct. You can use a semicolon to end the initialization statements. Why am I having errors here? The name y does not exist. What's it saying? The name y, sorry, I'm just trying to see why it's underlining it in red. Okay, I think it's because we haven't finished supplying the. Let's just go ahead and finish supplying. Let's put the Boolean expression. Okay, so let's say x is less than y. Okay, so we initialize x here and assign the value to x. We initialize y and assign the value to y, and then we use a semicolon here, and then in our after statement we'll say x plus plus. I just want to make sure, why am I having errors here? The name y does not exist in the current context. I just initialized y. Okay, this is very confusing. Let's just try to, let me try and see if I complete the loop. What happens? Okay, we're still not getting. Okay, I think we have a big problem. I might have given you a wrong explanation of the initialization statements. I was pretty sure you could have more than one initialization statement bundled together, separated by commas, but it seems like we can't. Okay, let's remove the y declaration. Let's just use an x. Int x equals 1. So y x is less than 10. X plus plus. Okay, this is very. This is. I'll just go ahead and pause this video and try to find out where I made errors in the explanation. Oh, okay, that's fine. Just go there. I'll pause that. Welcome back. So after all my search, I was able to find out the problem. Now it's very surprising to me actually that you cannot it's not any type of statements you can use here. So if you remember, initially I said you could have any type of statements, that's any statement whatsoever in here. However, that is not the case. After reading the manual of the C#, it seems like the only types of statements you can combine, well, let's say the types of statements you cannot use here is, for example, declarations of variables that are of different types. So for example, if I declare x here to be, say, int x equals 5, for example, and use a comma, I cannot declare again a different type of variable. So I cannot declare a float here now because I've already declared an int variable. So I cannot declare a float. So for example, I can't say float y. However, I can declare another int variable. So that's actually what I wanted to do initially. However, in declaring another int variable, which is y, I don't need to supply this int keyword any longer. So that means if I use an int y here, I'm going to have this error. Okay, so I just the way to do it is just eliminate the int and just leave the y. Now obviously all these I'm doing here, they are all optional. You can actually have these statements before the for loop, okay, at the beginning of the for loop. So you can have whatever. If I wanted a y to be a float, I can actually declare it up there. So they will all also serve as if it was they were initialization statements, okay, because these are going to be executed only once. So this is what I wanted to do. I'll just go ahead and do y equals 10. So this y, this is the declaration of it, okay. That's y is an int, okay, just keep that in mind. And then we put the semicolon and then our condition x is less than, let's use y here since we've declared y to be 10. X is less than y, and then the what do you call it, the after statements. You can have after statements separated by commas. So you can have y minus minus here if you like, but that would be terrible line of code there. Let's just leave it like this. We'll have x incremented by 1. We keep our y constant in that we're not changing, even though y is a variable, we declare this as a variable. We assign 10 to it, and we do not change the value of 10 since the value of y, since we're checking x is less than y to be our condition for the loop. So inside here we'll say we'll just write console dot write line. We'll say the value, let's not forget bracket, our string demarcator. The value of x is I'm going to add, remember the concatenation of strings. So by closing this double quotes and adding a plus, it means I want to concatenate this string with whatever I'm going to provide here, the variable I'm going to provide here. So the variable I'm going to put is x, okay? And then I add another concatenation symbol, that's a plus. Remember, we're dealing with strings here, so this plus means concatenation, like joining, okay? So instead of x, the value stored in x is going to appear here when it's written on the console. Okay, so I'm going to add a plus and then add the value while the value of y is, and then we're going to concatenate with the value of y, that's y. I hope this doesn't confuse you. Okay, what we're doing is we're just writing a string here, the value of x is, and then we concatenate that using this plus with the actual value stored in x. So x will not appear here. We don't want x to we don't want x as in the text to appear. We want the value actually to appear. So the number stored in x will appear there. That's why we're writing it outside the quotation marks, okay? And then we're also concatenating it to whatever this string is. And then the result is also to be concatenated with this string, okay? While the value of y is, remember, we're using a space here to make sure that this when we output the value of x, there's a space before this, okay? So now this you can see this is how the for loop is written. You can see we've gotten rid of, in the while loop there was a x plus plus here that we added down here. However, we have taken that out of here and we've appended it up here as the after statement. So whenever this statement is executed in the for loop, it is going to be followed by this x plus plus, okay? That's how the for loop. So if you look at the structure of the for loop, it's very, very similar to the while loop, okay? So for here, this initialization of x is similar to this initialization here. If we had like int y, suppose we had int y equals 100, for example, and then we change this to x is less than y. I'm just trying to make this this while loop exactly the same as this while loop. So it's 10, not 100. And then in the condition we say x is less than y. Now okay, let's change this 5 to 1. If you look at it, these initialization statements, int x equals 1, y equals 10, are the same as these two initialization statements before the while loop, okay? And then this condition, the Boolean expression, is the same as here. It is in between after this semicolon, okay? And then this plus plus is coming down here. The only thing that's different in the loop is this console.writeLine, which is written down here, which is changed, of course, to the value of x is. This one just outputs a normal string that says this statement was written by a loop. However, here, sorry, here we're outputting the value of x is, and then we write the value of x, and then while the value of y is, we write the value of y. Okay. So let's just go ahead and run this program. Remember, this is the code that's going to be executed, and we expect to see this written 10 times, each time showing us the value of x and the value of y. Let's go ahead and click on play. Okay, yes, that is it. So you see how the for loop is executed. So the value of x is 1 while the value of y is 10. Remember, we kept y constant. We didn't change the value of y. If we had changed the value of y, the reason why we didn't change the value of y is because imagine if we were incrementing y as we're incrementing x here. It means when x changes to 2, y changes to 11. So it means x will never ever reach y, because as we're moving the ball, we're moving a goalpost. So the ball is never going to reach the goalpost. Okay, so that's why we kept y constant. And you can see, yes, it keeps outputting, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3. It keeps repeating this line of code, and each time it repeats, something changes. That's the value of x changes. Okay, that is what the for loop looks like. I just hope my explanation was not so long and boring in such a way that people get the idea that the for loop is it's very complicated. Actually, the for loop, to me, I feel the for loop is a simplified while loop. If you remember, in the while loop, you needed to create these initializations at the top and then add this after statement at the end inside your loop. However, the for loop is more like a simplified while loop in that you take those two initializations and just put them inside your normal brackets, separate it by a semicolon, use your condition, take this out of here, which doesn't really make sense, by putting it together with your main code. Okay, it's like this, just like an auxiliary code, and this is your main code that you want to execute. You want to execute this 10 times, and this is just an auxiliary code to make sure that when it reaches 10, it stops. Okay, so we take that auxiliary code out of there and we append it here after the Boolean expression, and after the semicolon we append it here. So for me, I always use the for loop, because the while loop and the for loop are, if you look at it with a critical eye, you'll see that they achieve exactly the same thing. Okay, however, to me, the for loop is much neater than the while loop. Another thing you can look at is, to do this, we needed to write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code. However, using the for loop to achieve the same thing we achieved with the while loop, we only had to write 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code. Okay, so that's more compact. Okay, I hope this was a good lesson. Even though I myself I learned something, in that I never knew you couldn't write different initializations. Here you can't declare 2 different data types in your initialization statements. So that's a new thing I learned in programming today. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.